Hi there, thank you very much for waiting, but the wait is finally over. Today we're actually gonna learn how to play our first two chords, specifically the E minor chord and the D major chord. There's a reason why I picked those two chords over any other chords, because they are very easy to learn, yet very important, because you'll find them in a lot of songs. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring you really close so you can see exactly what you need to do with your left hand and with your right hand, okay? So let's start with the E minor chord, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time today on the first couple of chords. Usually I explain these things much faster, but since it's the first two chords, I will take a little bit more time because I want to point out potential mistakes. But let's get started. E minor chord, what you need for that chord is two fingers, your middle finger and your ring finger. And for now, I want you to put your middle finger in the second fret, that's that one right here, on the second string. So it looks something like this. And now put the ring finger one string underneath, that's the third string from the top, in the same fret. That's the only two fingers you need, and that's the only two fingers you should be using right now, in addition to your thumb. And your thumb is obviously in the back of the neck, just to give some counter pressure. So you basically wedge the neck of the guitar in between the fingers of your playing hand up here on the fretboard and your thumb. So your thumb always plays an important role. So again, middle finger, second fret, second string from the top. Ring finger, second fret, third string from the top. That's your E minor. Now, with your strumming hand, you will hit all the strings in order to play that chord. Not all chords work that way. There are some chords for which you'd only play a few strings and you can't play all the strings. But for this particular chord, the E minor, you should play all the strings. So now, how do you do that? Play all the strings. Well, you see here, I use my thumb and I just strum across all strings in one stroke, and it should sound something like that. Why do I use my thumb and not the pick? Well, it's a little bit too early to use a guitar pick right now. For the first few chords, I want you to use your thumb because that's important. You should develop a feel for the string, and that is really better done by using your thumb. Don't worry, we will be using a guitar pick very soon, but for now, let's use the thumb. So again, build your E minor chord as described before, and then strum all the strings on your guitar right somewhere here above the sound hole. So you don't want to do it here, and you don't want to do it here by the saddle. You want to do it here over the sound hole. So now it's important, and I know that's difficult for a beginner, to really listen how this chord is supposed to sound. Because the chances are that your chord might sound a little bit different, and that's perfectly normal. Your chord may sound something like this. Right? And I'm not trying to make fun of you. All of us went through the exact same thing, but I want to show you what you need to avoid, and that's a general rule as you practice new chords. So let's go back to the E minor. We know where to put your fingers on, but what I want to show you now is also how you supposed to put your fingers on the fretboard. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to change the angle of your view a little bit, and then it should become clear. You probably see that now a little bit better in that view. See the angle that I use on my fingertips as I touch the strings? By using this like 90-degree angle, I make sure that I don't accidentally cover any other strings, like for example the strings that are down below here. That is something that happens especially to beginners very often, because what they do is they play the chord something like this. You see that? And then accidentally they mute the strings that are supposed to ring freely. So they touch strings that they're not supposed to cover, and then it sounds something like that. It sounds somewhat okay, but it's not accurate, right? It's supposed to sound something like that. And a good way to double check for you is, and that's true for any new chord, you build the chord and then you play all the strings that go along with this chord individually. So I just told you, for this particular chord, the E minor, you play all the strings. So what I'm going to do now is I play the E minor here with my left hand, I build that chord, and then I play all the strings here individually, one by one, with my thumb. Let's do that one more time. See how clean it sounds? You hear how the strings ring freely, and that's exactly what you need to pay attention to as you play and practice any new chord. Another thing I would like to point out, it's a very common beginner's mistake. Look where my fingers are placed within the frets. What I mean by that is they're in the second fret, they are not on any of the fret separators, those metal separators here. So you want to avoid being on those, because otherwise the chord will sound something like that, as opposed to that. So make sure that you always that you avoid contact with those metal fret separators. So now the second chord we're going to discuss today is the D major chord. You need 3 fingers for the D major chord. Index finger, middle finger, and ring finger. The index finger goes in the 2nd fret, 3rd string from the bottom, which is your G string. The middle finger goes on the high E string, which is the 1st string from the bottom. And then 1 fret over into the 3rd goes your ring finger on the B string. That's the 2nd string from the bottom. Let me just change the angle a little bit so you see where to exactly place your fingers. You should see that here pretty well. That's the D major. And for that chord, unlike the E minor chord, you don't play all the strings, you don't play the high E string, you don't play the A string, but you play from the D string, which is the 3rd string from the top, all the strings downward. That's the D major chord. Again, we always want to double check as we practice a new chord that the chord sounds cleanly and accurately. And for that purpose, as described before, we play all the strings individually now. That's the D major chord. So now let's start with a couple of exercises in which we will combine the 2 chords with each other. Let's start with the E minor chord, the chord we learned before. Let's play that chord together 4 times in a row. Try to play along with me. We play it at a very slow but steady beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do that again. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Very good. Let's do the exact same thing with the D major chord. Remember, only play the strings you're supposed to play from the D string downward. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, especially in the beginning, I know what happens. you probably accidentally hit the A string a little bit, sometimes even the E string as you play that D major. It is not the end of the world, so don't worry too much about it. However, as you practice, I want you to pay a little bit attention on the strings you're supposed to play for each respective chord. Again, if you accidentally every now and then play the A string and the E string as you play a D major, it's not the end of the world. So don't panic. As you pay attention to that and as you practice, you will become more accurate in your playing, okay? So let's do an exercise together. Don't worry, we do it very, very slowly. But now I want you to combine the two chords with each other by alternating in between those two chords. We do it together at a slow pace. Start off with the E minor chord, play it one time. Switch into the D major, play it one time. Back to E minor one time, back to D major. Do it slowly together. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I know that is actually very tricky, especially in the beginning. But that's what I want you to practice for the next few days or so. Use the worksheet that comes along with that lesson. You should see that right under the video. I put a couple of very simple exercises together that you can do with the help of a metronome, ideally. If it's too complicated with a metronome, if you feel pressured, then leave it out for now. Make sure that you can play those two chords. And then when you feel like, oh, I'm pretty confident now with this chord change, then use a metronome. And I just want to show you something. As you become more confident playing those chords, you know, those two chords sound very nicely together. I'm going to show you something. You see that? And this is a little bit advanced now, but this is actually something we're going to learn in a later lesson once we have, you know, once you got introduced to the plectrum and once you got introduced to different strumming patterns. But this is how you start, right? You learn the basics, the two chords, and then you learn a little bit of strumming. You learn how to use a plectrum, and then start playing around with these things, with those elements that you just learned. So again, for now, focus on the E minor chord. Make sure it sounds as it's supposed to sound. Same is true for the D major. Play the strings individually to double check yourself. And then just follow the exercises that I outlined in the worksheet. You know what? Before I let you go, let's do it one more time together. This time, a slight variation. We play each chord 4 times before we switch over to the next. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it for now, and I know it's a lot, especially in the beginning. Your fingers will hurt, and I want to show you something. I don't know if you see that. Do you see that indentation? So you see, I've been playing for 25 years. I still get these things. Now, granted, this guitar is a little harder to play. It's a Japanese guitar. They're notorious for being a little bit more complicated to play, but they also sound very nicely. So you see, I still get that too. My fingers still start to hurt after a while. Well, not necessarily after a couple of minutes, but after a couple of hours. It gets better. So just stick to it. If it hurts too much, take a break. Go back and do another session for a few minutes later on the same day. But stick to a regular practicing routine. One last point. You see me, when I play the D major chord, do you see what my thumb does here? That I developed over course of time. It's likely that your thumb is, as you start out, somewhere around here behind the neck, that's perfectly okay. Don't force yourself to bring your thumb up there. It happens naturally after a while. It's true for all chords. So if your thumb is somewhere here behind the neck as you practice these chords, that's perfectly okay and perfectly appropriate. Nothing wrong with that. Continue doing that. Wherever you feel your thumb helps you most, that's where you're supposed to place it to, okay? I'll see you in the next lesson. Keep practicing and always email me with questions. See you next time. Bye-bye.